When Russia invaded Ukraine in February 2022, the outcome appeared inevitable. Experts and analysts around the world agreed that the Russian army would march to a swift and comprehensive victory, and that Ukraine simply didn't have the means or manpower to defend itself. Yet, here we are more than 4 years later. The war rages on, with Russia in arguably its weakest position and Ukraine appearing stronger and more in control than ever before. There are many people to thank for this miraculous turnaround, from high-profile figures like Ukraine's President Volodymyr Zelensky to the countless Ukrainian men and women who have laid their lives on the line to defend their homeland. But one man in particular has played perhaps the most crucial role, quite literally rewriting the rules of war to change the entire course of the conflict and shift the momentum massively in Ukraine's favor. His name is Robert Josipovich Brovdi, otherwise known by his call sign Magyar, which translates to Hungarian. Hero of Ukraine and commander of the Unmanned System Forces, Brovdi is the face of Ukraine's drone revolution, and those who follow the Russia-Ukraine war closely will undoubtedly have heard of him by now. They'll already be familiar with his distinctive deep voice, grey, Viking-like beard, and the unique captions and narrations he's provided to hundreds of videos, showing Ukrainian drones hunting and eliminating Russian troops, military equipment, and infrastructure. Even fervent followers of the conflict, however, may not be fully aware of just how much influence Magyar has had in terms of shaping Ukraine's strategy, saving lives, and evening the odds with Russia. This is his story. The story of how a seemingly ordinary businessman with zero military experience became the bane of the entire Russian army. Born in 1975 in a small city in western Ukraine, not far from the border with Hungary, Robert Brovdi displayed a competitive streak and an aptitude for mathematics from an early age, qualities that would eventually prove invaluable during his military career. He studied enterprise economics at university before entering the working world and enjoying immense success as an entrepreneur. He started several businesses across an array of sectors, including real estate, food, construction and clothing, and made his fortune in the grain trade. His Granum group of companies ranked among the top 5 grain exporters in all of Ukraine and the #1 exporter to China. Brovdi's success allowed him to live a life of luxury. He traveled the world, lived in the likes of China, Hong Kong and Singapore for several years, amassed an impressive art collection, and even founded his own art foundation to promote the creativity of his countrymen. He'd worked his way into a powerful position and had more than enough wealth to effectively do whatever he wanted. So, when the conflict kicked off in 2022, it wouldn't have been at all surprising to see a man like Brovdi simply flee the country. He had a wife and 2 sons to take care of after all, and so could have quite easily opted to start a new life somewhere else, far from the horrors of war. But that's not what happened. Brovdi didn't run. He fought back. Indeed, 3 weeks before the invasion officially began, Brovdi, like many of his fellow Ukrainians, had a strong feeling that war was imminent. So he decided to play his part in defending his country. He enlisted in the Territorial Defense Forces and learned some basic military skills, like how to dig trenches and handle rifles. This was when he decided on his codename Magyar, a nod to his Hungarian roots. When the conflict commenced, he was initially involved with supporting the evacuation of several key suburbs. Together with many other people who had little to no military experience, he was then sent south to the front lines of Kherson. There, he witnessed the full ferocity of the Russian army. The enemy would bombard Ukrainian positions using mortars, tanks, rockets and artillery, and Brovdi's unit was never able to fire back because they simply couldn't tell where the Russians were firing from. Days turned into weeks, as Brovdi and his fellow troops simply endured the enemy's assault, unable to even locate a single soldier, let alone take them out. Faced with this seemingly impossible situation, many people would have simply given up. They might have fled the front lines to stay alive or waited to accept their inevitable fate. But not Brovdi. When faced with a challenge, he wasn't the kind of person to simply back down. He was a man who had spent his entire life solving problems, and he was about to solve this one as well. He realized that the entire issue boiled down to visibility. Pinned down by the enemy's fire, his unit was simply unable to scan their surroundings and understand the lay of the land. But what if they could send eyes into the skies, spotting the enemy's locations from above, and then sending that information to surrounding units to help them strike back at the Russians? And all they needed was a simple device, a device that Brovdi was quite familiar with. During his time as an international jet-setter, he often bought gadgets from the various countries he'd visited to take home to his children. Those gadgets included consumer drones. He realized that if he could get a drone like that into the air, he could turn the tide of the battle at last. And that's exactly what happened. Brovdi managed to get his hands on a simple, cheap drone and used it to guide artillery strikes against Russian positions. It seemed like a breakthrough, a game-changing tactic that could have much broader implications for the wider war. But not everyone saw it that way. Brovdi has revealed in interviews that many officers in the Ukrainian military at the time followed what he calls an old-school way of thinking. They did things the old-fashioned way and didn't have much faith in modern technologies. So, even after witnessing the results of Brovdi's brainwave, they didn't feel that it was worth investing any additional time, money or resources into the idea. Fortunately, Brovdi felt differently. He could see the potential value of unmanned aerial vehicles, UAVs, not only for gathering intelligence and assisting with artillery strikes, but for conducting attacks of their own as well. As Brovdi puts it, "We could see the worm. We needed to drop something on its head, but we also needed to avoid losing the drone because it was expensive, while still producing a result and turning the process into something repeatable." In the months that followed, Magyar took matters into his own hands. Together with the rest of his unit, the so-called Birds of Magyar, who were also equally enthusiastic about the potential applications of drone technology, he began experimenting with UAVs, finding ways to make them more lethal. Using their own money, the Birds invested in various commercial drones from China, modifying their designs and attaching munitions to them. They even set up their own testing ranges, creating primitive targets by filling condoms with water and hanging them from trees, before flying drones towards them, honing their skills and learning how to strike their enemies with efficiency and precision. This was the beginning of a movement that would change the war. And in the months that followed, the Birds of Magyar would go much further. As it became increasingly proficient in the emerging art of drone warfare, the unit was sent to various locations along the front lines, tasked with supporting artillery crews, undertaking aerial reconnaissance, and carrying out strikes on enemy targets. With every passing month, Magyar's reputation grew. His unit became iconic, an inspiration to the entire Ukrainian military, as reports continuously rolled in of the Birds successfully striking hundreds of Russian assets, suppressing enemy drones, and even carrying out more unusual but equally important tasks, like laying thousands of anti-tank mines remotely, again with the use of UAVs. The wider world also got to know Magyar as he became one of the biggest Ukrainian military voices on social media, regularly sharing updates and videos on Telegram about the combat operations of drone crews. Inevitably, other units began to follow the Birds' example, and even some of the commanders who had once criticized Brovdi's approach began, at last, to see how important UAVs could be in terms of observation, intelligence gathering, operational planning, and frontline strikes. Little by little, this led to drones becoming an increasingly large part of Ukraine's operations, culminating in the creation of a whole new military branch, the Unmanned Systems Forces of Ukraine, with Magyar himself being chosen to lead it in June 2025. It was then that Brovdi finally had free rein to bring all of his best ideas to life and turn the tide of the war like never before. Now, quick side note, the military show brings you the full picture, not just headlines. Hit subscribe to stay ahead of the curve. Now, having risen from a simple civilian volunteer to one of the most powerful posts in the Ukrainian military, Magyar wasted no time. He instigated an innovative plan of action to change the way the Unmanned Systems Forces operated and make the most of Ukraine's drone advantage. He was confident that UAVs were the key to the entire conflict, but also felt that this technology still had so much more potential just waiting to be unlocked and optimized. More specifically, he believed that drones weren't just helpful for frontline operations, but that they could also be used to carry out both surveillance and strike missions deep inside enemy territory and make life as difficult as possible for the Kremlin's forces. To test this theory, he first orchestrated what he calls a Carousel system of continuous drone surveillance. Essentially, this revolved around keeping UAVs in the air at all times, rather than just flying sorties from time to time. When one UAV lands, another takes off to replace it, so that Ukraine always has eyes on the skies. No blind spots, no downtime. Just a continuous stream of intelligence about the enemy's movements and locations. This in turn allows Ukraine to plan its next steps, identify its targets, understand the Russians' logistics, and predict their movements too. As Magyar notes, "We had an uninterrupted picture of the entire sector. We understood the current situation completely." From there, it became much easier for Ukraine to hit the Russians in the places that mattered most, their supply lines. drone crews began targeting enemy troops and vehicles as they made their way to frontline locations. They stopped fuel and ammunition deliveries, they bombarded evacuation routes, and they made it significantly harder for Russia to actually amass sizable frontline forces, creating whole new kill zones in the areas directly behind the front and massively degrading the enemy's combat effectiveness in the process. Brovdi also set ambitious goals for Ukraine's drone crews and introduced a new system to measure battlefield effectiveness by awarding points for every destroyed target. He encouraged drone operators to concern themselves more with results rather than procedures. It didn't matter how they got things done as long as they achieved their objectives, and also urged them to target at least 30% of all strikes against Russian personnel rather than focusing exclusively on assets and infrastructure. This all tied back to Brovdi's passion for mathematics. Able to look at the war in terms of pure numbers, he realized that Russia would always be able to maintain pressure on Ukraine as long as it could continue to recruit more soldiers than it lost. Nothing would ever change if Russia had 30,000 new troops each month and only lost 15 or 20,000 of them. The enemy's army would keep on expanding, and Ukraine's forces would eventually buckle and break beneath the sheer weight of the opposing force. Drones had the power to change that. So Brovdi began ordering more and more strikes on Russian soldiers. Not allowing the unmanned systems forces to get bogged down in bureaucracy and red tape, he fast-tracked the introduction of new drone types and control systems as soon as they were available, forging valuable feedback loops between drone crews and developers to ensure that the teams under his command had the exact tools they needed to achieve their aims. By early 2026, his changes had started to bear fruit, as multiple months went by in which Russia's casualty rate exceeded its recruitment rate. And Brovdi didn't stop there. As drone technology improved and UAVs were able to fly further and faster, he laid the groundwork for what would become two of Ukraine's most significant strategies: the Deep Strike campaign, which began in 2024 and involves long-range drone attacks against targets deep within Russia itself, like oil refineries and military bases, and the Middle Strike campaign, which started in April 2026 with the goal of triggering a massive logistics breakdown in the occupied territories of Ukraine. This was perhaps the biggest and most important shift of the entire war. Before Brovdi's changes, drones were almost exclusively used in and around frontline locations for defending trenches and orchestrating attacks. Now, however, they're regularly used for strikes hundreds or even thousands of kilometers beyond the front. It's thanks to this man that Ukraine has carried out over 300 successful strikes on Russian oil facilities, triggering massive fires and explosions at refineries across the country. While Russia's core oil production capacity remains largely intact, these attacks have severely damaged key facilities and temporarily reduced its refining capacity by roughly 10 to 20%. It's down to him that Russia's energy sector, the backbone of its economy and the primary source of funding for the war, is in its weakest state since the collapse of the Soviet Union. And it's because of Robert Brovdi that the fire and fury of the war have come home to Russia. In fact, that was one of his primary motivations when planning the campaign in the first place. He openly admits that he wanted the Russian people to experience the same kind of things as their Ukrainian neighbors. He wanted them to be roused from their sleep by the sounds of air raid sirens, to see flames and smoke rising above their cities, to suffer the impact of fuel shortages, cancelled flights, and the uncertainty of never knowing when and where the next attack might occur. He wanted to shatter the illusion that the war was only happening in Ukraine and only affected Ukrainians, and he succeeded. Now, Russians who spent years isolated from the horrors of the front lines are seeing their towns and cities turn into battlefields. They hear the hum of Ukrainian drones above their homes, they witness the fires and explosions, and they feel at least some small sliver of the terror and panic that Ukrainian people have had to endure all this time. Bit by bit, it's taking a toll. Russian morale is dropping by the day. Putin's popularity is slipping to record lows. More and more people are eager to see the war brought to an end for some sense of normalcy to return to their lives. And literally millions of Russians now know someone, a husband, a son, a brother or a friend, who's either died or been wounded in the war. Many of those casualties were caused either directly or indirectly by the same drone crews under Brovdi's command, and the deaths will continue to accumulate until the conflict comes to an end. Once upon a time, it seemed that the only way it would end was with a resounding Russian victory. Now, however, Ukrainian success seems like a realistic proposition, and this too is thanks in large part to Brovdi's efforts. His middle strike campaign, which has involved drone strikes on the logistics and supply lines that Russia relies on to move troops and resources across the occupied territories and into Crimea in particular, has been incredibly effective. The main highway that Russia has relied on all this time has become known as the Highway of Death, littered with the charred remains of ruined convoys. By severing the lines that give Crimea food, fuel and energy, Brovdi and his drone forces have effectively isolated the region, triggering a mass evacuation and widespread panic as Russian citizens and holidaymakers rush for the exits. Again, the man known as Magyar is defying expectations and pushing Ukraine towards something that once seemed impossible: the liberation of the Crimean region that was ruthlessly stolen by Russia in 2014. He didn't attend a world-leading military academy, he didn't dedicate decades of his life to the armed forces, but Robert Brovdi has turned his country's fortunes around and emerged as one of the greatest tactical masterminds of the modern era. There's much that the wider world can learn from him, and Brovdi is eager to teach those who are willing to listen. When asked, for example, what he would recommend to NATO's leaders and generals to enhance their defenses and prepare for a possible future war with Russia, he quickly listed several important steps, such as erecting a so-called drone wall or buffer zone along the borders, where drones operate continuously to make enemy movements impossible. He also called on NATO nations to set up their own unmanned systems forces-style military branches, specialized exclusively in drone warfare, and called for much greater investment in anti-drone defenses and long-range strike drones too. His message is clear: drones are here to stay, and they're likely to be one of, if not the most important aspects of warfare for generations to come. Ukraine understands that, and it's up to the rest of the world to catch up before it's too late. Regarding his own future, Brovdi says he doesn't expect to return to his old life ever again, vowing to dedicate the rest of his days to the defense of his nation. But no matter how his story ends or progresses from here, his impact on the war is undeniable, and his legacy will never be forgotten. He began the war with no relevant experience, and very few people who backed or believed in him. This was just like Ukraine itself, which was seen by so many around the world as the ultimate underdog, doomed to fail in the face of a far greater and stronger opponent. And just like his homeland, Brovdi proved the doubters wrong. He defied the odds, innovating and adapting to the situation in which he found himself, before eventually turning the tables on his enemies, proving to be far stronger than anyone could have ever imagined. Now, you can learn more about how Ukraine's unmanned systems forces are getting even stronger under Brovdi's leadership in this video, which looks at the world's first autonomous unmanned fighter jet. Alternatively, check out this video to see how Vladimir Putin's closest allies are well and truly turning against him, with one even calling him out on live TV and demanding an immediate end to the war. And finally, be sure to subscribe to the Military Show for more reports, insights and analysis you won't want to miss.